Shalom and welcome to this week's edition of the Rabbi's Ramblings. Hope you had an enjoyable and, of course, liberating Passover. In this week's parasha, the parasha of Kedoshim, it speaks about the prohibition of having false measurements. That one is prohibited from taking a block which says that it weighs 1 pound, putting, for instance, green beans on the other side, and telling the customer, here is your pound of green beans, when really that block had weighed less, and therefore you are giving the customer less than 1 pound while charging them for the full pound. Now we see some interesting things about this prohibition, and that is, number one, that we are not only not allowed to use the false measurement, but we're actually not even allowed to have it in our possession. And in fact, if we're using it, then it's theft. The prohibition against false measurements has nothing to do with the actual use of it. It's just being in possession of it. Another thing is that it says in the verse when speaking about this prohibition that Hashem states, I am the God that took you out of the land of Egypt. Says Rashi that the exodus of Egypt, coming just now from Passover when we celebrated, of course, the exodus from Egypt and slavery, it was conditional. Hashem took us out of Egypt on the condition that we don't have false measurements. Now, what is it about this prohibition that, number one, the entire exodus of Egypt can be said to be done on the condition that we have accurate measurements? And also, why is it that unlike other commandments or prohibitions, that it's not about the action, even just being in possession of the measurement is already no good? So the answer is as follows. When it comes to theft, not a good thing, but it's a monetary loss. Money can be replaced. When it comes to false measurements, there's something far greater that's being lost and that is integrity. Now here, you don't actually have to use the weights. If you use the weights, then you're not committing the prohibition of having false weights, you're stealing. So when it comes to the prohibition of false weights or false measurements, what we're losing over here is something far greater than money, and that is integrity. That you are stating one thing to the customer, when really the truth is something else. And that can't be replaced so quickly. And that is so fundamental that Hashem tells us, why did I take you out of Egypt? Or what was your exodus of Egypt conditional on? On you being honest, on keeping your integrity. And now it's not that the weights are actually being used to cause a monetary loss to someone else. Just being in the very possession of these false measurements and weights, that already causes a loss of integrity, and that is a very grave sin. Now measurements, false measurements, what they do is they give off one impression when the reality is another. And from this we can take a lesson in our personal lives. Sometimes we'll sit back and think about where we're holding. What am I trying to do? What type of person really am I? And we can use a false measurement. Out of the love for ourselves, we can say that I'm really a pound, but yet we don't quite add up or measure up to it. So this week's parasha reminds us, let's be honest with ourselves. Where am I today? Where am I this week, this month, this year? Where would I like to be tomorrow or in a week and in a month and a year from now? But let's remember that when making this measurement, that it is an accurate one. Shabbat Shalom, and remember, you matter, so make a difference.